Overseas, a story breaking overnight. North Korea's fourth reported missile launch in about 2 weeks. The missile fired this morning flew more than 600 miles into the waters off North Korea's east coast. A top North Korean diplomat tells ABC News the launch is a response to what he called the constant nuclear blackmail of the U.S. More launches are expected. This from a suburb of Oklahoma City. A suspect fighting with a police officer, even trying to reach the officer's gun. Another officer joins in as the suspect's alleged accomplices flee in a car. A bystander gets involved, helping wrestle the suspect to the ground. The suspect is now facing several charges, in addition to being implicated in a credit card scam.
As police try to find the other people involved who are seen driving.
Watch the terrifying moment when Emirates Flight 521 landed at Dubai International Airport.
After landing, it took fire.
Huge plumes of smoke billowing into the sky, onlookers in disbelief, and then, moments later, an explosion. The Boeing 777's emergency chutes deployed as all on board safely evacuated. Emergency personnel then rushing in to put out the smoke and flames. This man, whose wife was on board the flight, says he spoke to her an hour prior to the flight arriving.
My wife called me 1 hour before that while they were landing, got fire. Then luckily they are safe.
The jetliner was traveling from India to Dubai with 282 passengers and 18 crew on board, and the flight path appears completely normal.
Hello, Emirates 521.
And through all the chaos on the runway, remarkably, officials for Emirates say there were no fatalities. Emirates Airlines says their main priority is to offer support for concerned family members and friends. In fact, the airline says dedicated phone lines are active for family members, and the NTSB says they are sending officials over to the crash site to assist.
Tonight to Rio, the opening ceremony for the Olympics just 2 days away now, and tonight there are lingering fears about the water in which athletes will be competing. ABC's chief medical editor, Dr. Richard Besser, traveling to Rio to test what's in the water.
Tonight, the water around Rio is under the microscope. The World Health Organization is sounding the alarm for some 1,400 Olympic athletes set to compete in these polluted waters. We took a look from the air, where we could see the pipes directing, we're told, untreated sewage straight into the water. But up close, garbage, debris, and worse.
Here's something you see all over Rio. Raw sewage streaming into waterways that lead out to the bay where they're holding a lot of the Olympic events. That's a big health concern. In that sewage, viruses, bacteria, that can cause severe infections.
The WHO is now telling athletes to avoid swallowing water, cover open cuts, and wash immediately after exposure. Olympic officials insist the water is safe. But to see for ourselves, we collected a sample in 2 different spots and took them to a lab outside Rio.
And Dr. Richard Besser with us tonight. And Rich, as we await those lab results likely tomorrow night right here, in the meantime, the warning already from the World Health Organization that you just reported on, telling athletes to avoid swallowing water, avoid open cuts in the water. That's alarming.
That is alarming. You know, you would not expect that athletes coming to the Olympics would have to take those precautions, but these aren't typical games. The athletes this year are going to be competing in what we think is close to raw sewage.
All right, Dr. Besser with this and the results on the way.
The first case of a U.S. police officer arrested for supporting ISIS. It was a D.C. transit cop. He's charged with trying to help the group, trying to help the terror group by buying them gift cards. ABC's Mary Bruce has the story.
This morning, an alarming first, a police officer charged with aiding ISIS. The FBI allegedly catching Nicholas Young in the act. The FBI saying the 36-year-old thought he was selling hundreds of dollars of prepaid phone cards to an ISIS operative, but it was really an undercover FBI agent. Officials Wednesday raiding his Fairfax, Virginia home, searching through his belongings.
It's very, very disturbing.
Neighbors describe him as a loner.
I'm not shocked because he was so weird. He was just so secluded and kept to himself.
Officials who had been tracking him for 6 years say Young was part of a radical network and previously associated with this man, Amin al-Khalifi, seen in this undercover FBI video readying an attack on the U.S. Capitol.
Now, despite Young's close ties to one of the nation's largest transportation systems, officials say he was never a threat to commuters here. If convicted, he now faces up to 20 years in prison. Robin?
The urgent search for a killer right here in New York. After a jogger's body was found along a path she often ran. ABC's Lindsay Davis is in Queens with the latest. Good morning, Lindsay.
Good morning, George. Katrina Vetrano was said to go running along this path with her dad just about every day. But on this one occasion, her dad didn't go. And now this close-knit community is not only grieving, but fearful, questioning if this was targeted or random.
This morning, New York police are on the hunt for a killer.
Right now, there's evidence of strangulation, asphyxiation.
Overnight, a vigil for 30-year-old Karina Vetrano, who went out for a jog around 5 o'clock Tuesday and never came home. Concerned, her father called police and went out looking for her on a path they often ran together.
You can imagine his angst at that point. We found her face down in the ground. We immediately called EMS.
Vetrano was found face down just a few blocks away from her New York home. You can see her here in a short film she wrote and starred in called The Paradox. She frequently wrote about death, even posting this in a blog in 2013. Sometimes when I'm feeling really sad and lonely and misunderstood, I wonder if right now, at this age and this time of my life, if by some freak accident I died, what would happen? And then this happened in broad daylight. Her father, a retired firefighter, was having back pain and couldn't make the run on this particular evening and says he asked her not to go alone.
She was a sweetheart. She lit up the room when she walked in. She was a beautiful girl.
Police say they have a lot of digital evidence, including cameras in the neighborhood where her body was found.
She has a very high social media profile, so this is something that the detectives now are going to have to cull through every one of these things to see if there's been any threats, if there's been anything said really inappropriate.
According to the autopsy, she was strangled to death. There's also evidence that she was sexually assaulted. Police have yet to make any arrests. George?
So horrible. Okay, Lindsay, thanks very much. Let's talk now to our consultant, former FBI Special Agent Brad Garrett. So we just heard in the piece right there, surveillance cameras, her social media profile. That's where the police begin?
That's where they begin, George, but the real key is going to be who frequents this area. Maybe the local patrol folks will give them some insight into that, but for whatever reason, George, trails and females, there is a certain attraction by a particular type of predator to go to those locations. So has he been watching her in the past? Did he happen to come upon her this particular day? I don't know, but my guess is he's going to have some connection to the park, and between the surveillance cameras and checking out who patrol may know who hangs out in that area could be a potential lead. Some connection to the park, but not necessarily to her. Yes. I will tell you, George, in working attacks of females in parks, they tend to be random. Now, that doesn't mean that the bad guy didn't see her at some other point, but one area that I would check that I've used in the past is you're going to pull up every registered sex offender in and around the proximity of that park, and maybe even a circle bigger than that. You're going to look for MO, and you're also going to look for other assaults in parks, whether it be Central Park or some other location, because people who like to do this, George, are going to go from park to park. Right, but as we saw in this Chandra Levy case in Washington, D.C., sometimes these can be so hard to solve. Exactly, which is, again, a wide open case. So all I'm suggesting is the things I just mentioned, you've got to jump on immediately, and I think they've got some real possibility. Okay,
breaking news overseas, a deadly attack in London. An American woman has been killed, 5 others injured. A suspect is now in custody, and London is on edge as police step up security on the streets there. ABC's Alex Marquardt is on the scene with the latest. Good morning, Alex.
Good morning, Robin. That's right. This attack happened right here in Russell Square in the heart of central London at the height of tourist season. Just moments ago, London's police coming out and saying that the suspect is Norwegian, of Somali origin. There's no evidence of any links to terrorism. Excuse me, Robin, a slight disturbance here.
Security stepped up in the British capital this morning. Police cordons around Russell Square in central London as investigators comb through the scene of this gruesome knife attack. Police were called just after 10:30 p.m. Reports of a man on a rampage. They discovered the female victim in her 60s, fatally wounded, and 5 others injured.
Early indications suggest that mental health is a significant factor in this case,
and that is one major line of inquiry.
Overnight, one of the biggest security responses the city has seen since this same square was targeted in one of the deadly bombings in the summer of 2007.
I could hear the policeman screaming, "Stop, don't move, don't go any further, just stay where you are." And he turned around and continued running.
This as London braces for a terror attack that authorities say is all but inevitable. This week deploying 600 additional heavily armed police officers into the streets of the city in the wake of the recent wave of attacks in Europe. So even though there are no links to terror, this is still very much a city on edge. Among the wounded, there were 5 wounded. There was 1 American. This morning, London's mayor calling on citizens to remain calm and vigilant. Robin, George.
All right, Alex, thank you very much. A lot of chaos.